Hi, this is producer Melody Allison. Thanks for joining us in Crazy Town, where Jason, Rob, and Asher tackle crazy-making topics like climate change, overshoot, runaway capitalism, and why we're all deluding ourselves. Here's a quick warning. Sometimes this podcast uses swear words.
Language!
Now, on to the show.
I'm Rob Dietz, and I am excited, although weirdly excited, to welcome Peter Kalmus back to Crazy Town. Our listeners should know Peter by now. He's a climate scientist, kind of a climate activist as well, basically doing everything he can to raise awareness about the climate emergency. And Peter, I invited you back on the show this time because of the article of yours that I read in the New York Times that was titled, "As a Climate Scientist, I Knew It Was Time to Leave Los Angeles." So welcome, Peter, to the show.
Hey, always love being on Crazy Town. Feels crazier than ever right now.
I think we're some kindred spirits here. Well, look, let's start with this. Extreme tragedy in Los Angeles, in the neighborhood where you used to live. It's amazing that you got the article in the New York Times. I read it. It's kind of an emotional ride. Really brilliant piece. Can you talk about your feelings of what's happened there? And it's still ongoing here a couple of weeks in. I mean, the fires are not out and more are blazing up.
Yeah, so I'm trying to sort of reconstruct the chain of events. I think it was Wednesday when I really started, after the fires touched off on Tuesday night, and I started to kind of learn how bad things were, and like little bits and pieces, texts from friends, videos that were appearing online of places that I knew very, very well from my 14 years of living in Altadena, burning in flames, like in the background behind the local news reporter who was talking about it. Eventually I texted one of my neighbors, and he confirmed that my house burnt down, and that sort of hit hard. This old vegan grocery store and restaurant that I used to go to right on Lake Street with my friend John running it, and he lost that and his house. And it just seemed like everything I loved was burning, and pieces of my memories where I raised my kids, all my friends, all the good times we had there, this beautiful enclave in Northeast Los Angeles, which was sort of felt like a place that time hadn't touched and everyone knew each other. And it was really paradise, and it was all kind of felt like it was all gone. So it was very hard to process all of that. And I'd been working on another piece for the New York Times about basically, how people working for federal agencies around climate could respond to the incoming administration, because that was before the inauguration day, and what we would lose if federal workers on climate started to wash away that term and talk about extreme weather instead, and sort of like back away on the actual cause, which is fossil fuels, right? So like, what would we lose? So I quickly realized I had to write a piece about the fires. So it was very personal. It helped me process somewhat my emotions. I was in tears a lot of that day and the following day. Stayed up most of Wednesday night working on the piece, and then on Thursday it was a lot of back and forth, a lot of wrangling. The original version of the piece was like very, very strongly condemning and indicting the fossil fuel industry, which knew what their products were doing for the last 70 years, has been lying and blocking action pretty much since then, definitely at least the last 50 years. And the Times thought that would lose a lot of readers. So we went back and forth a bunch of times. It was a lot, especially since I wasn't on a lot of sleep. And I do think that the piece kind of took a little bit of an angle that in my mind is a little bit clickbaity, but I think it resonated far and wide. And, to the Times credit, they allowed me to leave in the indictment of the fossil fuel kind of as I originally wrote it at the
Yeah,
very end.
I definitely got that. The conclusion. You tried to give people something to, not just to put their anger into, but something to do to resist. And I just have to say, Peter. First of all, I'm sorry. That's a
Yeah,
hard
me
thing to
too.
go through.
Yeah.
Another.
Well, I came out a lot better than a lot of people, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah. Well,
been
I mean, that's kind of the
very hard
subject of
to,
the article, right?
yeah,
Is that you were able to leave because you
yeah,
saw this coming. I mean, it's funny. I saw the title of that article, and I knew I was, oh, that's got to be Peter. And
yeah,
I opened it up, and sure enough, it was. And but yeah, maybe you can talk. I know you've told this story, but maybe you can tell our audience, like, you saw it coming and had the opportunity to leave. And I know it's a hard thing because, as you just described, you had quite a community that you had found and were a participant in Altadena, but safety kind of dictated that you had to move your family across the country. So maybe you could just talk about that decision.
Well, I didn't think it would happen this fast, for sure. But I was over the 14 years. The heat waves and the fires have been getting noticeably worse. Like, I didn't need to do any analyses. I could feel it in my body. I could feel it in the trees that were dying all around when that was accelerating. And there was a kind of a important moment for me in this whole process. Kind of a sort of like a decisive moment was a mega fire called the Bobcat Fire, which was in the San Gabriel Mountains. It started in the San Gabriel Mountains a few miles from my house in Altadena. And it started the day after this incredibly intense heat wave, which was very hard on my body. And then, my family and I were pretty stressed out. We had an evacuation warning, so we were ready to go. We didn't actually get an evacuation order. We were in a smoke cloud for many, many weeks. I can't even remember the exact number. More than 3, I would say, less than 5. I should have been keeping better journals. But it was a lot for my body too. I had really pretty strange health effects. I was trying my best to tape up my windows, run a HEPA filter. Like, I would go to the kitchen to get food and I would hold my breath because the rest of the house was so smoky. It was during COVID. It was very surreal, and I kind of wanted to leave, but the rest of my family wasn't having noticeable health impacts, and they were kind of doing remote teaching. My wife was a high school teacher then, and the kids were doing remote learning. So, and it's the kind of thing where the next day the wind could change and it could be better, but it turned out to be very long, smoky. And I remember Mount Wilson Observatory was kind of for several days possibly going to burn down, which that was sort of emotional to me. That's where the Edwin Hubble discovered that the universe was expanding. And so as an undergraduate in physics, I knew about Mount Wilson Observatory long before I moved to Los Angeles. And it kind of had this sort of starry place in my mind.
Yeah.
So it just drove home the point about how vulnerable everything is, and how much this sort of like the bedrock of my experience on planet Earth and what kind of I grew up, how quickly that's all changing. And then after the Bobcat Fire, I really was kind of thinking hard about how we could possibly move, because it's caused by fossil fuels. Over the course of many administrations, fossil fuels have been expanding in complete opposition to what scientists have been advising, which is that's what's causing overheating. Planetary overheating is what's causing all of these impacts. So obviously, the way out of this, the way to safety, is to ramp down fossil fuels. And administration after administration, Democrat, Republican, it doesn't seem to matter. They keep expanding fossil fuels. So I didn't see things getting cooler and less fiery anytime soon in Altadena and in Los Angeles. And so my wife in 2022 got a job offer here in Durham. And so we took that as an opportunity to move. So we were very fortunate. She got that job offer. It was a great opportunity for her. It was a way for me to kind of like, it was her turn to do a career move, right? Because we moved to Los Angeles in 2008 because I got a postdoc once I got my PhD at Caltech. And so that's what caused the family to move then. And so it was really her turn. So the stars kind of aligned in that sense. And,
Let me ask you about as you just said, you moved to Durham, which is in North Carolina, kind of more on the eastern side of the state.
Yeah.
But of course, in September of 2024, a few months ago, Hurricane Helene just pummeled western North Carolina. And I had lived for about 6 weeks one time. I was teaching an ecology camp in western North Carolina. I had zero idea that was a place that could be hammered by a hurricane. It's so far inland. Really beautiful, idyllic Appalachian mountain scenes. I had no sense. And you and I talked about this a little bit in a previous conversation. Like, what is a safe place? I'm here in the Pacific Northwest in Portland, Oregon. Another spot that we thought was kind of safe, or at least, maybe nowhere safe, but kind of shielded. And we had that heat dome with wildfire smoke soon after. Same kinds of scenes that you're describing, trying to stay healthy while you have the worst air quality on planet Earth because the wildfires have been pushed to a much more extreme state. So I'm just wondering, what is your thinking on safety and relative safety? And is there any place people can move? Do we just keep rebuilding in the places that are getting pummeled by these natural disasters?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, they're not natural disasters. I got we had a town hall at NASA JPL, and the invitation to it mentioned that the LA fires were referred to them as natural disasters. And
we need to call them unnatural disasters, right?
Yeah, because they really, we've been. I really don't think there's I don't know if there's been an attribution study yet for those fires in LA. It'd be a very hard attribution study to do, because I feel like it's just it's a very subtle kind of. My instinct is that it's a subtle sort of tipping point of it's getting hotter, so that makes the fires more likely. You're getting more drought, and then you have the atmosphere. It's holding more moisture. Because of the Clausius-Clapeyron, so hotter atmosphere holds more moisture. So it's sucking more water out of the land and out of the plants, but then also at some years it's dumping more water. So you get this, buildup of grasses and shrubs, and then the last couple of years were pretty wet. And you get this very dry year. Still don't think they've had any rain there. Around 2% of the normal precipitation for this rainy season. So it's just absolutely tinder dry. And then you get those, unlucky, you get those strong Santa Ana winds that coincide with that extreme drought, which is kind of now moving later and later into the rainy season, right? So just all of these knobs getting turned up at the same time and leading to fires that I just don't think, even if they were managed, quote unquote, managed perfectly, right? That's the talking point, is that there was mismanagement. And I think with something this big, there's always going to be mistakes. Nothing's going to be managed perfectly. But suppose you did have perfect management, I don't think it would have mattered. I heard one firefighter or a firefighting expert had a quote that, even if you had a fire engine in every driveway, it wouldn't have mattered. Because I think the wind was that strong, the embers were flying that fast and that far. The wind was just, like a bellows, just blowing through all of these houses because things were so dry. So it's just I think it's a new. We've gotten to kind of a new level of these impacts, and we're still continuing to expand fossil fuels. With the Trump administration, they want to expand fossil fuels even faster than what is sort of like kind of economically sensible, right? Like they want to open federal lands and waters for more drilling. I think that there's already an oversupply of oil and gas in this country right now. So the oil companies are going to be like, well, hold on a second. We don't want to lower the price too much. That would be a glut. So there's right now a real cultural moment where kind of obtusely, the people in power in this country want to expand fossil fuels as almost ideologically, not economically. So these things everything's going to get worse, and these impacts will get worse, right, caused by fossil fuels. So I don't think, it doesn't feel like in that kind of a world, any place is going to be safe. That safety is found through addressing the root cause of the problem, ramping down fossil fuels. Now, it does seem increasingly likely to me that at some point, someone somewhere, it could even just be a single billionaire, is going to decide to start doing aerosol geoengineering, which I don't think will end well, as opposed to kind of addressing the root cause, right? So it's like, we got to think of a good analogy for aerosol geoengineering. It's like, kind of like, all of your limbs are getting cut off, but they like hook you up to a blood infusion or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'm thinking of like, you have a serious body odor problem and you just spray some kind of scent over yourself. That might work for a little bit, but if you don't keep spraying the scent, it's going to be a mess. And just take a shower, okay? Just do what you need to do.
I think it's common sense, though. If you have a clear cause, right? There's complete scientific consensus. It's just very obvious that fossil fuels are the primary cause here. There's animal agriculture contributes at a secondary level, but by far the primary cause is fossil fuels. So common sense says you address that and you start ramping down. And until we do that, I don't think it's safe to say any place is safe. And you're right, you named two of the really big things that for me, places that for me psychologically make me feel kind of that no place is safe. Asheville was kind of considered a quote unquote climate haven. Up in the mountains there, very, very hot and humid summers in the South and in kind of my part of North Carolina. A lot of people would go to Asheville and spend, it was a very popular destination in the summer to escape that heat. And then the same thing in the Pacific Northwest. Long before I was thinking, kind of the first place I was thinking to move away from Los Angeles, I don't even remember what year it is, but it was many years before the Bobcat fire. So, in the 20-teens, I actually was thinking about possibly coming up to Corvallis. I thought Corvallis was a great place. I love the Pacific Northwest. It felt like a climate haven to me. And then
would have loved to have you as a neighbor there. That would have been fun. Two things popped out of your last response. I mean, one is this is a cultural moment. You said something like that. I know you've been at this. I've been at this for a long time, trying to get people to do something different. You're really ringing that bell saying, hey, we need to curb our use of fossil fuels. You've written a book on how to do it. You've put out app. You've done all kinds of stuff. You're doing all of this and seeing things going the wrong way. I know you can't predict what's going to cause a sudden shift in cultural change, but do you think the fires in LA get us there? Is this, I don't know what suffering it's going to take for us to turn things around, but I mean, the suffering of an amount of loss out there, is this a moment that, we could look back in a bunch of years and say, wow, that's when things started to change in the United States?
Well, as somebody who's not currently living in Los Angeles, it almost feels to me like that moment has shifted because of the inauguration and all of the executive orders that we've seen this last week. So I don't see that much discussion anymore about the LA fires, even though they're still burning and new ones are still starting. So it feels like individual humans have an kind of uncanny ability to just kind of reset their sort of baseline psychologically, right? And say like, oh, well, I guess this is what's normal now, and they go on with their lives. Because I guess that's a very, very useful psychologically, because in a way, for any one individual, these are things that are completely out of our control, right? Now, it's that same old weird paradox between the individual and the collective, because the collective is nothing more than a bunch of individuals working together, right? So, I want to make it clear that I think it's still worth it for everybody to try to do their best to contribute to this change, to fight. I am a climate activist. I should have said also that I'm speaking on my own behalf. That seems especially important now, although it doesn't seem like enough to protect me anymore. I've engaged in civil disobedience. I've been arrested a bunch of times. I was very frustrated that President Biden was still expanding fossil fuels and, was approving pipelines and, drilling in Alaska, et cetera, expanding fossil fuels as quickly as he could as well. Maybe not as quickly as the new administration, but it felt like there was some sense of like, we should do something about climate change. It is real. It was very frustrating to me that there was this sense that there was an acknowledgement that it was real, but they were still expanding fossil fuels. So that was very weird to me.
It's the epitome. It's the epitome, Peter, of the crazy town ethos. Like,
right.
Here, we saw a direct quote from Biden, and I think we made fun of it in a previous episode where he said, we're working on climate change and we're expanding fossil fuel production. Don't think we can't do both. We're America. Right. It's like, what levels of mental gymnastics do you have to do? You got to stop burning fossil fuels, and yet the message from the highest office is, no, we're going to live in fantasy land.
Very, very, very frustrating for me as a scientist. But at the same time, it felt really helpful and useful, and like it was, the movement was growing when I would do civil disobedience. I think of it as like a metal rock bar, and you're trying to kind of lever out a giant rock. And to do that, you have to have some hard surface underneath that you can lever against, right? And that it felt like that, at least then, there was a general acknowledgement that, there was a lot of disinformation, obviously, that was really, we know now very clearly, that was manufactured and funded by the fossil fuel industry. I think they should be sued up the wazoo for all of these, for all of the devastation that their dishonesty, their deception has caused. But there was still in the highest offices, there was a kind of at least a consensus that global overheating was bad. So there was a moral kind of foundation against which to pry by doing civil disobedience. It felt like if enough of us got going, for example, we could maybe push Joe Biden to declare a climate emergency, or for example. So I wrote a bunch of pieces about that because it seemed like a leverage point. It feels different now. It feels like, there's so little, there's not a moral foundation to push against, where civil disobedience would even be useful. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but that's what it feels like. It feels like mush. There's like moral mush right now. So I'm not quite sure what to do. I'm in a state of extreme uncertainty right now. Maybe there's other climate activists that have a clear sense of what to do, but I'm kind of like thinking and writing and organizing my thoughts. But at a visceral level, it feels very different right now. That civil disobedience would come with much greater punishment, but that the public at large, the majority of people, might not kind of feel any sort of moral resonance with a civil disobedience act, which is that's the whole kind of reason for doing civil disobedience, is that people recognize that it's right, that you're on the right side of history, that you're doing this selflessly to try to protect them, right? Or to try to make the world better. And it doesn't feel like right now that there is an acknowledgement of that, which is quite strange because the science hasn't changed. And
Right.
these impacts they're only going to get worse. I think in the next 4 years, we're going to see stuff that probably makes the LA fires look fairly small and benign in comparison. It wouldn't surprise me at all. It's a random process. It's like popcorn popping. So I don't know if we'll get a pop that big in the next 4 years, but it feels like it's likely to me because every year it's getting hotter. So right now, it looks like heating is accelerating. The last 15 years or so, we've been increasing at a rate of about 1/10 of a degree Celsius every 3 years, as opposed to every 5 years, which is what it was in the previous decades before 15 years ago. So, we'll go up by more than 0.1 degrees Celsius likely in the next 4 years, and that's going to drive.
Let's talk about this, maybe translating it a little bit. I've heard you talk about a critique of the idea of the new normal, because you'll have an LA fire break out, or you'll have a Hurricane Helene, and people will say, well, this is the new normal where insurance can't pay for stuff and the damages are worse. And the idea of the normality isn't there, because it's not like we got to this point and temperature is now going to be staying at this level. Like you just said, we're increasing faster. And, to me, the big critique of climate scientists is they've been, kind of too rosy, right? Like most of the predictions have, they were for many more years out than when we've actually been seeing the temperature rises and the effect. So I would just like you to bring home the point that what we have now is not a new normal. We're still on an escalator that's taking us hotter and hotter.
Yeah, you've said it perfectly. The baselines keep shifting year after year, both the physical baselines and the kind of memory or emotional baselines of us as individuals and societies. It's devastating to me, but it's very hard to hold something so big emotionally. But for example, I don't think it's likely that we will have an Amazon rainforest for much longer. It's not clear to me how that's going to play out, but I feel that it's likely in our lifetimes that we will see kind of a complete end to the Amazon rainforest. That is kind of a horror movie, sort of like cosmic proportions, right? Like we don't know of any other life in the universe. And the kind of richest place of biodiversity on the only planet we know to have life is in the process right now of being irreversibly lost. That is cosmic level tragedy, but it's very easy for me to imagine all of humanity and most individuals just taking that in stride and being like, oh, well, I guess maybe now we can raise more beef down there, or like we can, those pesky trees and animals and birds and insects, we can just grow soybeans instead. So it's I think it's kind of a great psychological strength to be able to just have a firewall against these kinds of great losses and to avoid feeling that grief. But it's also maybe one of the biggest Achilles heels of our species, that we are able to do that because, I think all of the climate activists I know, maybe the biggest thing that sets them somewhat different than non-climate activists is that they don't seem to have that ability to take these kinds of losses in stride, that they feel this very deeply, that they've allowed themselves to grieve, that they've all cried about what's being lost. And then they want to protect what they can still protect because of that sort of like coming out of denial at an emotional level, feeling that grief, really accepting that this is really happening, right? Because like you said, a lot of the messaging has been rosy. There's been a lot of people who have books to sell that want to talk about how all we need to do is hope, and that there's still a lot of reason to hope. There is reason to hope, but it's a very messy, very kind of kind of snotty hope where you're blubbering and you're crying, and then you do your best to get on with the work after that. So because it's a hope that already accepts that so many people have died and there's so much suffering already locked in, and that billions of lives are at risk right now, and that we can lose the world's biodiversity, the coral reefs and the Amazon rainforest, that weather patterns are shifting, that coastal cities will probably need to be abandoned and other cities are going to burn like Los Angeles. And, heat waves are going to get so bad that they're going to cause blackouts. And eventually we could start seeing, connected crop failures that make it hard for us to have food the way we've always taken food for granted. So I don't know, to go back to an earlier point you made, I became a climate activist in 2006. And my hope was that by like banging the pots really loud and screaming from the rooftops and building a movement, that we could start to move away from fossil fuels before the impacts got this bad. In 2006, I was confident that by like 2020, we would have been well on our way to transitioning away from fossil fuels, and we would have avoided these sorts of impacts that we're now seeing today. I've come to realize that probably the only thing that will start waking people up, and we need people to wake up to the reality of global overheating and climate disasters in an apolitical kind of way. We need people who, maybe want to deport immigrants and want to see, want to repress people who have different conceptions of gender than them. We still need those people to also understand that climate change is really happening somehow. I don't know how physics, what's actually happening on planet Earth in terms of heat, how that got put into an ideological bin, and how that's like a left issue when we all need food, we all need to not die in heat waves, right? We all need to not have our cities burned down. So like we somehow, so I am very much on the left, but I don't think we're really going to start addressing global heating until it becomes more of an apolitical issue. So in a weird way, maybe I'm not a great spokesperson for it right now since I am on the left. But I think as these impacts get worse and worse, at some point, the gaslighting from the very top isn't going to work on working class and middle class Republicans anymore. And they're going to say, hey, wait a minute, my house just fucking burnt down. And you're telling me that climate change is a hoax? It was obviously climate related, right? So I hope that happens soon. I think it might be kind of starting to happen already. This is just one anecdote, but I was getting my hair cut a couple of months ago, shortly after the hurricane that kind of wiped out much of Asheville. And my barber, conservative, was like, hey, that Hurricane Helene almost got me believing in climate change, right? That's how he phrased it. And I thought that was kind of a remarkable moment. And if that starts happening more and more, and even Republicans accept that this is what they're seeing right in front of their eyes, all this, life on Earth disappearing, things getting hotter, that they, decide to stop listening to Tucker Carlson and President Trump gaslighting them, then maybe we can start to come together and make change on this. I'm sure you also see very many ways the future can go, and some of them are dark. It seems like fascism and authoritarianism are clearly rising, and I don't think that's disconnected to global heating. So I don't know. It's tough.
Let's give you a chance. You've said you're on the left, but I hear you trying to extend the olive branch. Being willing to speak with conservatives and people who hold very different views of how the world works than you do. It's a weird coincidence that on the very day that you and I are sitting here recording this interview, Donald Trump is visiting your current home state of North Carolina to tour the damage that was wrought by Hurricane Helene. And then he's flying off to Los Angeles, to your old home state and old hometown, to tour the damage from the wildfires. And, we know that he's going to throw a lot of shade and blame on mismanagement. And, that's just kind of who he is. But I'm wondering, here we are in this highly polarized era that's colored by all kinds of misinformation. Let's say you were either in Asheville or maybe you're even on Trump's plane and you get to be in Asheville and LA, and you're given a little bit of time to brief President Trump. What might you say to him?
Yeah, I would try to just kind of lean on the science as much as I could, explain some of the basics, try to convince them that this is just something that's happening on a planet. Like we look at exoplanets and we understand the climates of exoplanets, and the Earth is a planet like exoplanets. And, you've got photons from the sun, you've got photons from the surface, you've got gases in the atmosphere that react with those photons, and it has nothing to do with politics. But I doubt that would be convincing to him. I think it does seem like there's a chance, especially if his constituents, his base, his core base, starts to somehow kind of see climate happening under their eyes. You don't need scientists anymore to explain it to you, really. You're living through it. You can tell it's getting hotter. You can tell things are getting weird with the weather. I think there's a chance that the kind of Republican leadership could change its stance and kind of be like it just gets too hot and too hard to kind of dance around it and kind of gaslight around it. It's then at the same time though, like it would, I think then the Trump administration would probably look a little more like the Biden administration did in terms of maybe saying that it was happening, but still expanding fossil fuels. They're so dug in now with the so-called energy emergency, which there's no energy emergency. The United States is producing more oil and gas right now than any other country at any time in history, right? So there's a huge glut of production. Also, if it was an energy emergency, would you really want to make it harder to build wind power projects, right? Which is like a big. So it's a very. So there's so much ideology there, and there's so much money invested in keeping the oil and gas flowing, and so many. Here in the United States, money is speech is power. So it's hard to imagine, even with really, really bad climate disasters, much worse, suppose, than the LA fires. It's hard for me to imagine the Trump administration kind of changing its stance and recognizing that fossil fuels are the cause, and then starting to, increase renewable energy and maybe find ways to transition away from fossil fuels.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one. I know that question is kind of unfair because no matter what you could say to Trump, it's something he doesn't want to believe, so he's probably not going to.
Yeah, I know. I would love for people to recognize that this is physics and that, science, and the planet, the temperature of the planet doesn't give a fuck about our politics.
It's a good message. It's physics, not politics. I really like that.
When a human does kind of like willingly kind of do the right thing and relinquish power and kind of care about others, they're like in the Catholic Church, those people are sainted. So it's just like, it's hard for me to imagine, especially these billionaires who I think to be a billionaire, you really have to close off your brain in terms of how you've stepped on so many people and hurt so many people to get to that point, that you really don't have a lot of empathy left to, right? I mean, isn't this like the big thing right now that kind of feels different to me on the quote unquote two sides is there's people on the left who recognize that we're part of a collective, we're part of a community, who want others to thrive as well as ourselves, and that we're all in this together. And then there are people who think the right way forward is to just have as much power as possible for themselves personally, as much money and power as possible, and don't see like it's a more individualist approach, and don't mind, they see kind of this caring for others as a weakness almost. I know they don't think that they're evil. They think they're doing the right thing for America, for example. There's a lot of ways to wrap it up in sort of slogans and jingoism. But to me, that's the real big difference. And I don't know if climate's trying to teach us something. To me, it's that we're on this tiny little planet together in this vast, chaotic, violent cosmos. And we're on this amazing spaceship that protects us, but its thermostat system is very, very fragile, and it's very easy to kind of make the planet much too hot for life as we know it, and certainly for 8 billion humans to exist. And we have to, if we came together and worked together and looked out for each other, we'd all be fine, and we would have solved this a long time ago. And there's enough for all of us if somebody doesn't hoard $500 billion to themselves.
Well, Peter, one of the reasons you and I keep getting in conversation is I think we're looking beyond the science and getting to the philosophy and the psychology, and that always fascinates me. And I kind of want to finish this interview with getting back to the grief and the emotional side of things. And I know you've done a lot of work on yourself and in community with grief. And so I want to set this question up with something that a listener recently wrote in to us at Crazy Town. This person, I don't know them, but this is what they say: I live in Florida, and I'm kind of losing my mind about what I should or even can do about, everything. Participating in this ecocidal society seems insane, but because of being raised by that very society, I have zero survival skills for myself, have no clue how to grow my own food, and since my job pays me $15 an hour, I can't afford to move anywhere. I haven't actually seen a group in my area that's organized around the climate. As far as I can tell, the movement is dead here. What the hell do I do? And then they're generous. They say, thanks for your podcast. It's been comforting to listen to people who are aware of the things I am, laughing and having a good time together. So, that's been our response in Crazy Town, is to make fun of things, laugh, try to have some ideas. But hearing that, I don't think that's a surprising comment to you, but I wonder, maybe we can finish with you contemplating, what does somebody in a position like that do given what they're facing in the world today?
What a great letter. Really just kind of laying it all out there. And I think it's a great point that even just hearing people thinking these things and sort of saying what's really going on is a huge source of comfort when it seems like everything is crazy in this crazy, crazy town and in this crazy country and in this crazy world. So that's something. That's not nothing. Because we can't survive alone. We're terrible at that. I'm kind of obsessed with shows like those reality shows that where they drop somebody into the forest and they have to try, and we're terrible at that. Even though
you watch them just suffer for about if you're really good,
for 2.5 months until they get choppered out. It's and these are some of the most skilled survivalists amongst us. So we are absolutely creatures of community. We do not survive alone, and we don't thrive alone. Psychologically. We have to, and we're in such a fractured kind of information and connectivity landscape. I think starting way back, maybe as far back as the Great Depression, I don't know, there's been a real trend towards this, white picket fence house with the individual family unit, the nuclear family, and you commute to work in your car, and there's a whole bunch of cars in the traffic jam next to you, and you're just trying not to have road rage with them. You're certainly not connecting with them in any way. And then you get to your cubicle and you're kind of in the talons of capitalism, trying to make your $15 an hour so that you can pay the landlord and have food to put on the table and maybe fight for some medical care for your kids. So we're in this extremely isolated, lonely, disconnected culture right now, which makes it very hard to deal with this problem that letter so kind of eloquently and heartbreakingly expressed. So I've personally been really leaning into mutual aid and into interpersonal relationships and into friendships and into kind of community. That feels so much better than kind of like how I was raised with the nuclear family. I don't think we were sort of meant to live in nuclear families like this. So I would say keep working to find that mutual aid network, kind of find your people. I know it's hard, especially for those of us who are introverted or have a lot of social anxiety. It's very, very hard. But it's, you know, being part of a group, being part of a community, it takes a lot of work, but it's work that's worth it. And then keep saying the truth, keep hewing to the truth. Don't fall for the gaslighting, for the propaganda. Don't let the fossil fuel industry convince you that carbon capture is the way forward. So like stay very carefully kind of connected to the truth. And then lastly, do what you can with the time and the energy and the talents and the opportunities that you have. So one of the things I try to do is to write about this stuff. It's very hard, to be honest. I think I'm reasonably good at it, but every little 900-word article can take a lot out of me. So I haven't gotten to the point where I can just whip them off, you know. But that's something that I do that I think helps a little bit. I did civil disobedience when that made sense. I'm constantly looking for ways to just do what I can. It never feels like enough. So then the last thing I guess I would say, it's been a while since I've really kind of thought of a different answer to this question, but I think that letter was so well articulated that it kind of got me thinking a little deeper about this stuff. But so then the last thing is to be really kind to yourself. I've had to really, I have a kind of a journey from going to where I thought like, oh, just doing more science, spreading more information, writing some stuff, like that's going to be enough to change things, to where I've kind of had to grow up and recognize that I'm just one person and I can do my best. It never feels like enough. I'm slowly learning how to not beat myself up about it not being enough. But I'll tell you, like, whew, man, the morning that New York Times article came out, that came out at 5 a.m. Eastern time, and I woke up at like 7:30. I was exhausted, but I woke up at 7:30, and I had this really horrible thought that, like, who the fuck am I to opine on a disaster this big, right? It felt just like so overwhelming to have written that, you know. But I think I'm getting better. You know, sometimes I'll just it's hard psychologically to be pushing back against forces this strong. But I'm kind of starting to realize that you know, I can just do my best, and it's never going to feel like enough. But I try to take care of myself too. Try to find joy where I can. Try to have fun still, even though things are so weird. So sometimes I feel grief. Sometimes I feel incredible joy, even amidst all that is being lost. And that usually comes from personal relationships and connection. So I know it's a tough answer. I don't think there's any easy answer. I think we all, this is kind of the work that you guys are doing at Crazy Town, is not necessarily giving answers to people, but trying to kind of be with, to sort of like learn from this moment and to kind of reject this idea that we can just keep modernity as we've grown up with it kind of chugging along. All we need is to recycle a little harder, or like some more solar panels, and we can just keep this going for longer, right? No, like it's something new is being born. It's gonna come out with a lot of suffering, a lot of pain. A lot of people are going to die. A lot of people have already died. But something new is being born. And the first, and I think there's a chance that humans will come out on the other side more together and with some gratitude, less arrogance, some sense of love for other species, sense of love for people who don't look the way we do. I think we might have to go through a horrible kind of a bottleneck of authoritarianism and fascism to get there. I hope we don't, but things aren't looking great right now. But I like to think we come out the other side and we've learned and we've grown as a species. And even though the planet is worse off, we're like, holy fuck, we got close to losing everything. But, these species that are left, we're going to love the hell out of them and love the hell out of each other. So that's my vision. I don't hold on to trying to go back to the old normal, I guess.
Right.
Things are going to change radically. And the sooner you can let go of that and the sooner you can start developing mutual aid and kind of being out there in the world with real people, I think that's the way forward. But I think it's going to be a rocky, a bumpy ride. And I don't think there's any way around that at this point.
Yeah, well, I think that you are taking your own advice, staying with the truth, staying with the trouble, acting out of kindness. And I don't know if I sense this yet, but I hope you will be as kind to yourself as you can. You're the only one who is, at least in our community, who's critiquing you in that way. I look to you as a model for somebody just doing what they can. And, you have considerable talents. So the fact that you are using those as a force of good and putting yourself into very, very uncomfortable and sometimes even dangerous situations is beyond admirable. And I'm just really glad of your friendship and your ideas, Peter. And I really thank you for staying with the trouble and being a source of light in all of this mess.
Yeah, I mean, it seems better to try to do what we can than to not. So yeah, I know I've been feeling a little bad that this it's been kind of a downer of an interview, but
Well, we've got to, sometimes the truth is, it's going to be hard to take, but it is the truth. So
there's so much love in my life, though. Like that's just the you can't. No one can take that away. This will show my age, but my favorite album of all time is Abbey Road, right? And it ends with the line, "And in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make." So wise words, I think.
Yeah. Let's end on that, a note of love. Thanks again, Peter, for being in Crazy Town with me. Maybe one day we'll find our way out of Crazy Town. And
I hope
until
so.
Next time, be well.
Yeah, thank you.
That's our show. Thanks for listening. If you like what you heard and you want others to consider these issues, then please share Crazy Town with your friends. Hit that share button in your podcast app or just tell them face to face. Maybe you can start some much needed conversations and do some things together to get us out of Crazy Town. Thanks again for listening and sharing.
Crazy Town, da 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 da, Crazy Town.